Take a look at the world map. If you look closely, you can see 6 continents on it, including Australia, North and South America, Africa, Eurasia and Antarctica. However, this was not always the case. About 300 million years ago, there was no division into continents on Earth. Instead, there was Pangaea, large supercontinent that was surrounded by the Panthalassa Ocean 200 million years ago. In the Triassic Period, Pangaea was the only continent on Earth. Then it began to disintegrate. In the Triassic Period, Pangaea split into 2 new continents, Eurasia and Gondwana. The smaller continent of Eurasia moved north and eventually formed Eurasia and North America. The larger continent of Gondwana split into continents such as South America, Africa, Australia and Antarctica. But few people know that another part separated from the continent of Gondwana. It took researchers 375 years to find it, and now we know about the existence of a continent in the world that has been waiting for us under the ocean. All this time, how this continent appeared, who used to live on it, and how long it has been underwater. I invite you to get acquainted with a new incredible discovery of scientists about the continent hidden under the ocean. In 1642, Abel Tasman went on an expedition. An experienced Dutch navigator was sure that there was a huge continent in the southern hemisphere of the Earth, which he intended to find at that time. This part of the globe remained mostly unknown to Europeans, but they had an unshakable belief that there should be a huge piece of land not yet discovered. The lands were given the name Unknown Southern Land. Mention of it had existed since ancient Roman times, but only now it was decided to check them. So, on August 14, Tasman sailed from the Indonesian port of Jakarta on 2 small ships and soon arrived on the island of Eurasia belonging to New Zealand. It was not the best start of the journey. Then the Europeans first met with the indigenous Maori residents of New Zealand it is believed that they appeared in these parts hundreds of years ago. On the second day, some of the tribe boarded a canoe and rammed a small boat that transmitted a message between Dutch ships. Then 4 sailors died after the team fired 11 more canoes from a cannon. The expedition ended. Tasman gave the tragic place the ironic name of the Bay of Murderers, and a few weeks later went home and did not having set foot on a new continent. Even though he thought he had found the great southern continent, it was clearly not the trading nirvana that he had imagined. He did not go there anymore. I was returning. By this time, Australia had already been discovered, but the Europeans believed that this was not the legendary continent that they were not looking for when they revised their opinions. Later, this continent was given the name Unknown Southern Land. Tasman did not even suspect that all this time he was right. 1 continent was missing. When a group of geologists discovered Zealand, it again hit the headlines. An area of 4.9 million square kilometers is more than the area of Greenland or India, and more than half the area of the Australian continent. The team boldly stated that there are more than 6 continents, despite the fact that are more than 6 continents, despite the encyclopedia's maps and search engines have long claimed that there are only 6 of them. But as we now see, in fact, they 7, and the newest of them are the smallest, the thinnest, and the youngest in the whole world. It has broken all previous records, a small number of islands, including New Zealand. It protrudes from the depths of the ocean, accounting for only 6% of its area, which is why the territory was hidden from scientists for a long time. But this is only the beginning. After 5 years, the continent still remains mysterious. Its secrets are carefully hidden underwater at a depth of 2 km. In addition to New Zealand, the continent includes the islands of Lord Howe and the Ox from the Pyramids, small Australian territories, as well as the island of New Caledonia, a French colony known for its stunning lagoons. One of the researchers of the 18th century, I argued that the latter did not exceed the size of a canoe. Zealand used to be part of Gondwana, a supercontinent that formed about 550 million years ago and covered the entire southern hemisphere. It was located in a corner on the eastern side, bordered by a number of other territories, including the entire eastern part of Australia and half of West Antarctica. Then, about 105 million years ago, Zealand began to fall apart, according to experts, as a result of a process that we still do not fully understand. Compared to the oceanic crust, which is usually about 10 km thick, the continental crust often has a depth of about 40 km as a result of stretching. Zealand has stretched so much that now the thickness of its crust barely reaches 20 km in the end. This thin continent has sunk under the water, but not to the level. Ordinary oceanic crust geologists recognize Zealand as continents despite the fact that it is thin and submerged due to the rocks that can be found there. Granite shale and limestone are common examples of igneous metamorphic and sedimentary rocks found in the continental crust, while basalt is more common on the ocean floor, but there is still a lot of unknown. The seventh continent is especially interesting to geologists and causes some confusion because of its unusual origin. So, for example, it is still not clear how extremely thin Zealand was able to maintain its integrity and not break up into many small microcontinents. Another unresolved question is when exactly Zealand went underwater and whether there was ever land on it. The ridges that are now above sea level were formed when the Australian and Pacific tectonic plates collided. The question of what lived there remains open. According to assumptions, Gondwana had a mild climate and occupied an area of 101 million square kilometers. The continent was home to diverse flora and fauna, including the first land animals with 4 limbs, and later the largest creatures ever could. Their preserved remains have been scattered on the rocks of Zealand in the 1990s. Then, remains of several fossil land animals were discovered in New Zealand, including the bone of a giant long-tailed, long-necked dinosaur sauropod, herbivorous dinosaur Hypsilophodon, and the armored dinosaur Ankylosaurus. In the southern hemisphere, fossil land animals are rare. In 2006, about 1006, about 1000 km east of Eugenie Island, a leg bone of a large predator was found, presumably varieties of Allosaurus. What is important is that all these fossils were found after Zealand separated from Gondwana, so perhaps these islands served as shelters while the rest of Zealand was drowned as it is now. So this does not mean that dinosaurs roamed most of Zealand. Rupert Caesar Land, Professor of Geophysics and Tectonics at Victoria University of Wellington, says that one can argue for a long time about whether the existence of land animals is possible without permanent land, and whether they would not have died without it. Kiwi, a clumsy flightless bird. Without it, Kiwi, a clumsy flightless bird. Whiskers and feathers resembling hair, one of the strangest and most charming inhabitants of New Zealand, only adds to the plot complexity. Surprisingly, it is believed that its closest relatives are not the moa bird, which belonged to the same group as the eretites and lived on the same island until it became extinct 500 years ago instead. Scientists consider its closest relative an even larger elephant bird, Epiornis, which lived in the forests of Madagascar 800 years ago. Now scientists are inclined to believe that both birds descended from the same ancestor who lived on the Gondwana. It took 130 million years for it to completely disintegrate, but once that happened, it left behind parts that later became South America, Africa, Madagascar, Antarctica, Australia, the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian subcontinent, and Zealand. It follows that at least part of the now submerged Zealand could remain at sea for the entire time, except that the entire continent and possibly even part of the New Zealand was flooded about 25 million years ago. It is assumed that all animals and plants were colonized after that. What happened, despite the possibility of direct collection of fossils, from the seabed of Zealand, researchers began drilling in its depths. Fossils that are found in very shallow seas are the most useful and distinctive. There are millions and millions of small, tiny fossils that differ markedly from each other, which is why it is easy to recognize their traces of the shape of Zealand. Another unsolved mystery. If you look at the geological map of New Zealand, you can notice two things. First, the Alpine Fault, the plate boundary that runs along the South Island and reaches such a size that it can be seen from space. And secondly, the shape of New Zealand, like the entire continent, is curiously curved. Both are separated by a horizontal line where the Pacific and the disk meet, and the tectonic plates seem as if someone took the lower half and twisted it so that the previously continuous rows of surged curled up almost at right angles. The simple explanation for this is that they were deformed by the movement of tectonic plates. But how exactly, and when this has happened so far, it is unclear. How Sutherland notes, the continent will not soon reveal all its secrets. It is quite difficult to study something that lies underwater at a depth of 2 chem and the layers, from which you need to take samples even deeper, 500 meters under the seabed. Sending ships to explore these areas requires a lot of time, money, and effort. But in any case, the existence of the seventh, the continent, sometimes proves that almost 400 years after exploring the Tasman, we still have a lot to learn. If you liked this video, do not forget to rate it and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your attention. See you soon for now.